fluttering noise.
Welcome to Wrestling and Everything Coast to Coast with your host, Buddy Sotello, Esquire, Evan Ginzburg, and also Mike Lano. Do you want to introduce our special guest for this week?
I do. I do want to pay tribute very quickly first to two brilliant geniuses of entertainment, Charles Grodin, fantastic actor, and the brilliant Paul Mooney, who I brought on when Evan and I were doing Legends. I brought him aboard. Evan and I can talk about him later. He was one of the most important comedians ever, lead writer for Richard Pryor, Sanford and Son, all those great TV shows on up to Chappelle's Show with Dave Chappelle. Also, I want to throw out there, if you've not seen this movie on Turner Classic, the last Orson Welles movie, Touch of Evil, it is out of this world, the last film noir movie. So, terrible transition to Falls, Brawls, and Town Halls, the history of professional wrestling in Northern Ireland, from my friend Nick Campbell. We've got Nick. It's like past 2 a.m. in the morning for him in Ireland. Nick, welcome aboard. What city are you actually in Ireland, and what's going on with COVID there? You guys all vaccinated, or what's going on?
Yeah, well, I'm from a place called Omagh, but I'm living now in a place called near Enniskillen. I don't know if those names will resonate with anybody who listens, maybe, but over here, I think on Monday we're getting to go back to sort of restaurants and bars and stuff. So we're slowly but surely getting there. We're not doing too bad. I think that you guys are probably a bit ahead of us, but we're getting there. So we are. So
have you had your shots yet?
Not myself, not yet, but I plan to. Yeah.
Good. Yeah, we're combating idiots in America, as you can imagine. We're ahead on some things, and things are fine on, are better, improving, but we have a lot of knuckleheads here that refuse to do the vaccine. Anyway, so we just hope, because the planet needs to come back. But this will make it easier, and the book just came out. It's terrific. I was talking about a couple of weeks ago about how incredible the scene in Europe is. It's like a revitalization of the Mark Rollerball Rocco days and all of those fantastic eras. And this new thing, of course, I'm sad that Will Ospreay had to give up his IWGP title because of a neck injury in New Japan. But you get stars that I've been raving about for years, Zack Sabre Jr., Dave, and it's crazy if you looked at Impact that Dave Findley Jr. lost the tag straps to kind of a lowly team in Impact. Why would they take the titles off FinJuice, a New Japan team, unless they just can't defend it or whatever? But we have the author here who is an expert. I'm just looking at some of the reviews. He's got 5 stars all over the place. A superb, extensively researched history of pro wrestling. Nick, tell us about yourself and why the scene there is so incredibly important. And Dave Findley, there's really very few as influential as he is. He's right on your cover as I'm looking at the book now.
Yeah, well, over here I do a bit of promotion. I promote my own shows, very local level stuff and through doing my own shows I got interested in sort of the history of Irish wrestling, before I was ever on the scene. And it was through meeting a guy called Eddie Hamill, who used to wrestle on World of Sport with, Big Daddy and Giant Haystacks and Rollerball Rocco. You named him. Eddie Hamill used to wrestle as Kung Fu, and he even wrestled in Canada for the Hearts for Stampede Wrestling for a while. And I suppose through hearing Eddie's stories, that's how I got kind of interested in hearing the stories of the old generation of Irish wrestlers. And from there, I guess I put all the stories together and I popped the book. And the scene over here actually is pretty good. Yeah, the Irish scene and the European scene in total is a pretty good scene. Not right now because of COVID, but when things get back, I'm sure it'll get back to strength again. So it will.
Pre-COVID was this a little off topic. Was there still like Catch Wrestling, Otto Wanza's old promotion? We sadly lost him, but is that still going on in Austria, or is it the scene pretty much the UK? And, the various non-related countries therein, Ireland, Scotland, and England.
I keep my own bubble, to be honest with you, in terms of the wrestling. But I think in Germany now they have. I don't think that Catch Wrestling. I think it's long gone. But they have WXW. I think it's like the promotion over there. I think they're on the WWE network, as part of the sort of indie promotions. I think. I'm not too sure on that now, but I'm not too sure in the German scene. But Germany's a good scene, and then the UK in terms of England, Scotland, and then by proxy Wales, and the Irish scene as well seems to be doing pretty well. I think those are probably the main countries in terms of wrestling hotspots in Europe is Germany, and then the UK and Ireland.
There's so many great wrestlers. Of course, we're talking to author Nick Campbell, author, wrestler, promoter. The book, Falls, Brawls and Town Halls, The History of Professional Wrestling in Northern Ireland. I'm going to ask one more question, then throw to Evan Ginzburg in New York. Is there any kind of resentment that when WWE and Paul Levesque set up this NXT UK a couple of years ago, there were two great sort of separate promotions there, at least in the UK, and it seems like they kind of pilfer talent sort of the way they've been doing it, here. You see a lot of Impact guys and some New Japan guys like Kushida in NXT. Was there sort of a resentment when they formed this, another offshoot of WWE rating talent from you guys?
Well, I suppose, the resentment would only come from people that didn't, get something out of it. I think the wrestlers all benefited, maybe the promoters will suffer for it, and have suffered. Some of the promoters, I think, just finished up and moved on because they couldn't promote their shows without all the access to all the stars that WWE then took from the scene. So I suppose there was some resentment, but I think a lot of the promotions didn't Progress Wrestling. They got signed up to the network, and ICW in Scotland, Insane Championship Wrestling. They're a big promotion over here too. They got signed up to the network. So there's some resentment, but probably more from the fans maybe than the wrestlers. I mean, the wrestlers probably see it as a good opportunity now to actually make money and make a better, stable living in wrestling. So.
Okay, yeah. Let me throw over to you.
What motivated you to write the book in the first place?
Well, it was, I've said before, it was through meeting Eddie Hamill, who used to wrestle as Kung Fu. And then I then met a member of members of the Findley family, Dave Findley Sr., he's Fit Findley's dad, and Fit Findley's sister, Wendy, who did a bit of refereeing. It's one of the first women's referees over here, so she was. And then through meeting there's a wrestler over here, he's 91 years old. His name is Darky Arnott. Noel, Darky Arnott's wrestling name. And after I met him, I realized I had to write this book because the man had his first match in 1950, and it just felt incredibly cool to have this, this 91-year-old who had all this, he had information about people who had long since passed away, and he was integral to the book. I would say if there's a main character in the book, it's Darky Arnott. So
that's great. I'm also 91 years old. I've been watching wrestling since Scott Hackenschmidt. But
you don't look about 91.
Yeah, thank you. But seriously, folks. So stylistically, I've been to England, not to Ireland. I've been to England. I've seen multiple cards there, different promotions. Stylistically, what would you say the difference is between your wrestling and, let's say, a typical indie in America?
Well, not much anymore. I mean, the stuff I read about in the book is from 1932 to 2002, and definitely from the 30s until the late 80s, maybe early 90s. There was a very different style of wrestling from what you guys have in America, and that is the sort of world of sport style of wrestling. I'm sure you've heard that term.
I was just about to bring that up because that's what I loved about British wrestling. Was I used to watch a lot of World of Sport through a friend of mine who was from England, and he would tell me all about it. And some of the best matches I think I've ever seen are from World of Sport. I love those.
Yeah, it's definitely for a long time it was a very unique brand of wrestling, sort of similar to Lucha Libre now in Mexico, and I suppose maybe Japan's strong style wrestling. There was a very distinct style in that World of Sports style. However, we pretty much became Americanized, and all of our wrestling these days.
We're sorry.
We're sorry.
We deeply apologize for that.
Yeah. Well, the thing is that
if it's any consolation, there was nothing we could do about it because it happened to us too. So there was nothing. We were powerless.
Well, here's the funny thing, right? Is that you read in the book is that the British scene originally in the early 30s was inspired by the American wrestling scene of the 30s, and then they cleaned it up, made it more British, and then eventually it went back to the American style in the late 80s. So since the late 80s, I mean, our wrestling is very similar to your wrestling. If anything, our wrestling is nearly just lifted, like borrowed from you guys since the late 80s, really. So there's not much, there's no really unique style over here, I would think.
Well, that was why it was hybridized, because when guys like the original Tiger Mask, Satoru Sayama, on through Keiichi Yamada, who just retired as Jushin Thunder Liger a little over a year and a half ago, stuff like that, they would bring over that British style. And I hate that people don't talk about how important Dave Findley was in the New Japan Junior era, the Liger era of the early 90s and all of that stuff. He was as important as Eddie Guerrero or, Art Barr when he was touring there, or Samurai or Naoki Sano, any of those guys who were competing in this stuff. Jericho, of course. And he was, he became a little bit heavier when he came to WCW, but very seldom do they even touch on that. And now most people think of him, oh, he's the guy that's finessing the women for WWE. No, Dave Findlay, apart from his son or his dad, is as influential and important. And, that's a lot of your book.
Did you learn any interesting facts about Fit Findlay that you could share with us from your book, in your research?
I'm trying to think. He was I interviewed him for the book, and there's a lot of really good quotes from him, throughout the book, and he was a great interview, very nice guy, he provided a lot of good insight to his career. I'm trying to think of something sort of unique or something that he sort of added, and I'm not too sure. I mean, you probably know the stuff, he had his very first match when he was 14 years old. He was probably Ireland's youngest, definitely Ireland's youngest wrestler at that point, and he had to do a Roman gladiator gimmick when he first started, called Young Apollo. He hated it. The helmet was made of a toilet brush, so it was and he had beer cans taped onto him that kind of represent armor, fake armor and stuff. There was no sort of nepotism by his dad. His dad was the promoter, you see, and there's no nepotism. He had to sort of, he had to suffer it like everybody else, pretty much, with bad gimmicks or with losing matches because he wasn't ready to win matches. So I can't really think anything too unique, but he was definitely a great interview and definitely really added to the book. So he did.
Actually, I'll shut up now and throw to Evan, but how did the name Fit come about?
Well, he was given it by a promoter called, I believe it was Max Crabtree, who was the head of joint promotions. So he was the one who, he had the matches on World of Sport. Big Daddy was Max Crabtree's brother. Big Daddy's real name's Shirley Crabtree. And I think he just said, I think Fit said himself that he just looked at Fit, said, "You look quite fit. I think we'll call you Fit Finlay." And I think Fit said that he hated he thought what a terrible name that is. And we're nearly 40 years later and everyone refers to him just as Fit Finlay. They probably don't even, I think he said himself, they probably don't even know my name's Dave, so.
If it works, if it's legendary.
Here in America, the lunatic fans all day, the WWE fans and AEW fans murder each other online because they probably have nothing better to do. But is there any rivalry over there between the Irish promotions and the promotions in England, or between the fans, or any of that?
I don't really think so. I mean, certainly, in terms of an Irish wrestling scene, I'm sure you guys have this in America as well, or any kind of scene. Different promoters don't like each other and they won't work with each other, and they try and stop wrestlers from working with other promotions. I think that's sort of been phased out a little bit in the last couple of years because, accountability has become a much bigger thing, especially online. You get criticized for, pulling these kind of stunts, like stopping wrestlers from working with each other and stuff. So, I mean, there's little squabbles and petty squabbles, but nothing too major. I think everyone has their alliances and everyone has their, people they like working with and stuff, et cetera, but nothing. there's no mad gossip. I don't think so.
Okay. And the world is a smaller place because of the technology, as people are seeing with our show tonight, New York, California, Ireland, and later, even more guests. But do you find you get a lot of viewers from around the world?
Well, I mean, the biggest promotion over here in Ireland is probably OTT Wrestling. And I think they're probably one of your biggest. Well, they're probably one of the biggest independent promotions in the wrestling world. Really, like they got a good name value and they get a lot of big stars. And I think that in terms of international, they seem to do pretty well. Again, shows that I do are very local level stuff. Like I'm just happy to do it as a hobby, but they seem to be kind of making a business of it, and they seem to do pretty well with viewers from definitely all over the world. Like so, Ireland's got a good focus in terms of OTT.
There you go, buddy.
Nick, can you tell me something that you learned about wrestling Irish history that surprised you when you wrote the book, that you didn't expect to learn and you found out about Irish wrestling history?
I think the thing is, if you asked me this at 2 years ago or a year ago when I started writing properly, all these things, but because I spent so much time in the book, it all became so normalized to me, so everything became sort of normalized. I'm trying to think of something that was really interesting to me. I'm afraid I'm struggling at the moment, but I suppose just how popular it was for a time. Like there was a time when there was multiple shows going on in Ireland at the same time. Like we're a very small country. Like you guys in America, you're like a massive country. Like and you guys can have shows every day of the week. Whereas in Ireland, we're a much smaller country, so there's much lesser demand for shows. But there was still a time, there was a real boom period. Oh, I'll tell you this. There was a time when Belfast, which is our obviously main city, Belfast, it was like the capital of wrestling, like 4 times a year in Europe. Like, the biggest shows in Europe happen in Belfast at least 4 times a year. We had guys like, I don't know if these names mean anything, but Nick McManus, Jackie Paulo.
One of the greatest heels of all time.
Yeah, like Mass Ambula's another big name. Les Kellett, he's a very famous name. I'm sure you guys know him. Like those, like they'd have these super cards in front of like 7,000-8,000 fans in a venue called the King's Hall, and that again, you guys have massive stadiums that hold tens of thousands, but 8,000 for over here was a big deal. You know what I mean? Like, and again, Belfast used to be really the epicenter, like 4 times a year. For European wrestling, and then unfortunately the troubles happened and that sort of stopped that. But yeah, I suppose that was kind of interesting, knowing how big Belfast was to the British scene for a short time.
Nick McManus, one of the greatest of all time, and I got to stay at Jackie Paulo Sr.'s house, meet Jackie Jr., so I know all of those names that you're talking about. So many guys. I was very close with Patrick Roach, Lord Pat Roach, the first territory, and perhaps one of the few, if only, North American territories. He came into our territory in '73, my home base, Los Angeles, where I was shooting ringside for the program and for the magazines. And he was something. He wasn't Irish. But, well, you'll have to do a second book maybe on Becky Lynch when we hear, it's not her real name, obviously, but we can, I don't know if you're in contact with her family or anything like that. That would be kind of fun because she's pretty international.
Well, what I plan to do, and I said at the very end of the book, is that I covered like 70 years of history. So when the book starts in 1932 and it ends in 2002. So whenever it gets to about 2032, I plan to do a sequel and to cover the last 30 years from 2002 to 2032. And cover all sort of the Irish, and also include my own sort of experience in the Irish wrestling scene. So I suppose in about 11, 12 years time, there'll be a sequel to the book, and hopefully I'll get cooperation. I mean, again, the last interview for the book were fantastic. Findley, for example, and Eddie Hamill were great to talk to. So hopefully some of the wrestlers from nowadays talk to me in about 11, 12 years time about their own experiences and their own careers.
Well, hit me up for photos again. I'm sure you will.
Definitely.
Falls, Brawls and Town Halls, The History of Professional Wrestling in Northern Ireland. It's a paperback. It's available now. Amazon.com. And Nick Campbell, the author, tell us before we let you go, where else can people get it, or is Amazon primarily where you want to send folks?
Amazon was the publisher, so they're the best place to go for it. Like, I find their whole publishing to be very, very easy to use, like, you know, and obviously easy to access and availability as well. So Amazon's the number one place. I mean, I have copies myself, but send them to America will probably cost more than it's worth, you know. But Amazon's definitely the best spot for it.
And if people wanted to get a hold of you through social media, how could they do so?
I'm afraid I'm a bit of a recluse in that regard in terms of social media. I don't have a Twitter page or a public sort of Instagram or Facebook. But in terms of an email address, I email at WCIIA wrestling@outlook.com. It's probably the best place to reach me. So that's WCIIA wrestling@outlook.com.
And do you have a website that anyone can check out? Do you have a website that anyone can check out?
I think we have the wrestlingireland.wordpress.com, which is where we put. I mean, the Wrestling Ireland is the name of my promotion over here, and we're on like Twitter at the Wrestling IRE and on Instagram at the Wrestling IRE or Wrestling Ireland. Just type it in. I'm sure it'll come up on Twitter and come up on Instagram and on Facebook as well. So the Wrestling Ireland is probably the best place to reach me as well. Like it's a promotion that I run over here. So.
Well, I really appreciate you staying up till 2:30 in the morning to talk to us about Irish wrestling, and we hope that our fans go check out your book.
It's a great read. It's gotten rave reviews from historians all over the world. They're going crazy.
Oh, well, what I call thanks for having me, lads. I'll a lot of cups of tea to keep me up here, so that like So I'm probably just gonna go to bed like as soon as this ends. I'll be up the stairs. Yeah. So.
We really appreciate it, and when you have your sequel coming out, we'd love to have you back on our show again.
I'll drag it back.
I dig the accent. I can listen to your accent all night.
Hopefully you understood every word I said, like, because I have a tendency to talk fast as well as have the accent. So hopefully everything.
I've spent a lot of time watching Monty Python. I've been well trained.
Okay, that's good enough then.
Great Nick Campbell, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, lads. Cheers.
So now let me add Javier.
We're going to be talking Hiro Matsuda, the genius, one of the greatest junior heavyweight world wrestling champions for the NWA, one of the greatest trainers of superb talent. And
did we mention Don Canoodle last week?
No,
I think that fell in between shows. Don Canoodle passed also.
Oh, he did. I didn't know that.
Tremendous and underrated.
Yes.
Great performer.
he was in one of those two plane crashes that occurred within just months of each other, the Flair one and the Bobby Shane one. He was on one of those. And, of course, the great tag matches with Slaughter against Steamboat and Youngblood. Oh, they were just setting Mid-Atlantic on fire.
Yeah, we should dedicate the show to him. And earlier, Mike mentioned
Paul Mooney.
Paul Mooney. And I saw Paul Mooney live several times. And he was very intense. The white folk would storm for the exits, some of them, and he would mock them as they'd leave. So he didn't play Paul Mooney, but he wasn't venting for the sake of venting. He had something to say. He was a genius, and he really helped put Richard Pryor on the map. So the great Paul Mooney,
he wrote the whole for In Living Color. He was one of the head writers. I mean, every great show, head writer. He came up with the Homie the Clown, the whole thing from start to finish.
And okay, we've got Javier in on the call. And
hey guys, how's everyone going?
Hey, how are you?
One of our favorite repeat guests.
Javier needs more books. He doesn't have enough books. Yes. Look behind them.
I'm going to be adding Stephanie here to the call in just 1 second.
We'll wind up accumulating things over the years,
Are those all wrestling books, or there's some other titles back there?
Star Wars, I see.
What was that?
I said, are those all wrestling books, or Evan says there's
there's a few Star Wars ones.
The wrestling books are actually not on camera.
Hello, is this Stephanie?
Hi, it is.
Hi, great. Glad to have you join us. Welcome to Wrestling and Everything Coast to Coast. This is Russell Jackman or Buddy Sotello speaking to you, and Evan Ginzburg, Mike Lano, and Javier Ojst is you're well familiar with, and we're happy to have you on as our guest this evening.
Thanks. Can y'all see me?
No, your camera is not active at the moment.
You just have to hit the button that looks like a camera, so it'll bring you aboard.
Oh, there it is.
And this week, I will let Javier have the pleasure of introducing.
Oh, there you go.
Thank you very much.
Hi.
Perfect. That's wonderful. Javier, please introduce our other guest for tonight.
Sure. Stephanie Kojima is the author of her father's book, the Hiro Matsuda stories. I've had the pleasure of speaking with her on a couple occasions, and I'm so glad you guys brought her on board. And she's got great stories about her dad and writing his book.
Thanks, Javi. It's nice
So,
to meet you guys.
Yes, please tell us about what it was like growing up with such a legendary name in Japanese wrestling.
Well, growing up, I really knew him just as my dad. Like, I knew he was a wrestler, but I didn't know how legendary he was until when he got sick with colon cancer. He, in the last month of his life, he decided to tell me and my sister his life stories and who Hiro Matsuda was. So that's when we really got to know him and learn what a legend he was and the people he trained. So growing up, he was really a loving, supportive father.
Why do you think he kept it such a secret from you and your family?
Well, for one, he was a heel. So I don't think my parents wanted us to see him in that role of being the bad guy or also being hurt, in the ring. And then also being Japanese, he kept family and business separate pretty much. So my mom and dad were in on the business together, and they knew, mom knew all about his life. And then for us, they protected us from the wrestling business as far as the fans and just the whole lifestyle, and the wrestling scene. They wanted us to grow up as sheltered and normal as possible.
Looking back on it, do you wish he had told you all those things about his wrestling life? I mean, I'm really open with my kids about what I do in wrestling, and they just don't give a damn one way or the other.
Yeah.
I did it. It's no big deal to them. They're bored of it. I
knew about it, but I wouldn't change it. No, the way it happened was how it was supposed to be, and but I just didn't think about it growing up.
Let me ask a couple of questions, and then I'll throw to Evan. Stephanie, this is Mike Lano. I've been primarily for Gong and Shukan Pro, Japanese wrestling magazine photographer, all the magazines. All we have left in the U.S. is Pro Wrestling Illustrated since 1966, and I was. I'd seen quite a few Hiro Matsuda against Danny Hodge. I was talking before we brought you aboard how important an NWA World Junior Heavyweight Champion he was, well before he started training some of the biggest names in the business. Most people just familiar with Hulk Hogan and Lex Luger, but there were many, 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 many others who got the pleasure of being stretched by your father. And I was on stage in '95. We did a Cauliflower Alley. That's the Brotherhood of the Business.
Okay.
And we had an ancillary function in Tampa, and I was on stage helping honor your father. We had Gordon Soley and Coach Heath and pretty much everybody there that was still alive. Mike Graham, Dory Funk Jr., Johnny Ace, John Laurinaitis. All these guys, they were still alive. Kevin Sullivan had worked for Eddie Graham's promotion where your dad was integral. But now with what we're doing and trying to help Asian American people and people of Polynesian and all of that stuff. Maybe, I'm thinking if he were doing this now, he might be just trying to protect you guys. How did the name come about as opposed to using, because we have Kojimas in Japan that are famous pro wrestlers now, more modern day. How did the Hiro Matsuda name, was sort of Americanized, or?
Well, he, if I remember correctly, he went to, I think it was when he went to Texas, if I'm correct. But he met a promoter that he reminded the promoter of his friend who was a wrestler earlier on, and his name was Matsuda. So, and then Yasuhiro is his birth name. And so Yasuhiro is too long. So they shortened it to Hiro and added Matsuda. So that's how it became Hiro Matsuda.
Yeah, I think the name of the wrestler was a Matty Matsuda. I think it was Matty Matsuda. Okay. And it was either Texas or Tennessee. One or the other, you're right.
But he was named after a bird I had.
Who are some of the other guys? Was Brian Blair, for example, and people like Steve Kern? Your dad trained so many people. Maybe you could reel off a few, because I haven't seen the book yet, which I'd love to review. And
I know those two he trained: Ron Simmons, Lex Luger, Paul Orndorff, Mr. Wonderful, and then Japan, the Great Muda, Osamu Nishimura.
Also a guy, Bull Ganther. I think his name was Bull Ganther. He passed away a while ago, but yeah.
Your father also looked after, along with Hans Mortier in Florida, Larry Simon, better known as Boris Malenko, Professor Boris Malenko, who was another hooker shooter. But your father wasn't like sadistic Larry Simon or Stu Hart in terms of, like really enjoying stretching these guys. He was, very serious about excellence in ring, both amateur stuff, learning the basics, chain and mat wrestling, and all of that. And do you have any hooker shooter stretching stories, or you might have stretched somebody?
There's a story Dad talks about when he wrestled in Miami with Malenko, and Malenko took him to a restaurant called Wolfie's. And that was
I've been there. I've been to Wolfie's.
Jewish food. So a lot of the book is about food, because my dad he loved all different kinds of food and would eat whatever culture he was in. He went to after Japan, he went to Peru and then to Mexico and then came to the United States. So he had a lot of exposure to different cultures, different types of people, through wrestling, which is what his dream was growing up in Japan. He wanted to travel the world with his wrestling trunks and become a famous American-style wrestler.
I'm going to throw to Evan, but any history with Ricky Dozan, the god of wrestling in Japan, who was actually South Korean? He wasn't Japanese, even though he was, and it was a whole big thing and trying to never admit that. And allegedly when he was murdered in December of '63, it was because the Yakuza guys had found out that he was not Japanese and he was from South Korea, which is tragic.
Well, the story I know about what Dad talks about Ricky Dozan is that he first trained him his first year out of high school when he chose to become a wrestler. But then Ricky Dozan told him he would have to make a name for himself as a judo master or in the sumo wrestling business. And my dad adamantly refused that he had to do that. He could learn wrestling and make a name for himself just through wrestling. So he quit Ricky Dozan and then started his own search for his way into the business and to America. And then, so once he got to America, his whole goal was to become the most proficient wrestler so he could go back to Japan to wrestle Ricky Dozan. But he did know that Ricky Dozan knew of his success because some of the sports writers from Japan had written about Hiro Matsuda. but he really wanted to be able to wrestle him. So when he was actually up in Ohio training with Carl Gotch, when he heard the news that Ricky Dozan had died, and he said it just kind of crushed his dream about, proving himself in the ring and beating Ricky Dozan. So that's the story he told me.
Wow.
In doing the research for the book, what was your father proudest of in his career?
The whole thing, really. I mean, really, growing up in Japan was during World War II and having this dream to come to America, the land of abundance. And I think he was just proudest that he made it to the position he wanted to be in. And that wrestling was always his love, and he was, gave him the life he wanted. It was always true to the business and respected it and treasured.
And you mentioned he was a heel and he wanted to protect you and the family.
Right.
I've been attending wrestling since 1974, and inevitably the Japanese wrestlers in New York at Madison Square Garden, except for Inoki, who came in as a guest, they were always heels. And I think that goes back to the racism from the xenophobia from World War II, and perpetuating these stereotypes. What's your take on that?
Well, my dad said he didn't mind being hated. He loved it because the more he was hated, then the bigger the draw and the better the match.
Okay.
So he played on it, and it didn't bother him. If it did, he didn't let me know.
Okay. Javier?
Mm-hmm.
Hey, how's it going?
Yeah,
what would you like to add, Javier? You're always the expert.
No, well, Stephanie's book is real interesting because it's not just wrestling. It's not front to cover, just wrestling and his journey through wrestling. It's his journey through wrestling through the United States, but wrestling was like the vehicle. And like Stephanie mentions, the food, he was always talking about the different foods he tried in different regions, different states. And he goes through the different wrestlers and people he met throughout the United States. So it's real nice to you're almost drawing a little map in his journey through Peru, Mexico, then going through Texas and eventually down to Florida. And he talks about when he buys into the Florida territory and a little bit about when the territory started dying out, and Crockett and up in North Carolina started picking their talent. So it was almost like the Florida territory collapsed from within, even though he was instrumental, and he says getting it back in the black when he kind of inherited it in the red. He wasn't the only owner. There were several.
Yeah.
But it's real interesting the way his life goes from surviving World War II as a child, surviving basically famine and barely having anything to eat with his parents, his dream of going to the United States, but first having to go through Peru, Mexico. And it's a real fascinating read, and the voice it's written in, it's like he's talking to you, and that's real interesting.
Yeah, it's written in. I just transcribed it. It is his words. I wrote the introduction and the conclusion, but then the meat of the book is Hiro Matsuda's words. So it's like him telling you the story of his life.
And what Hiro Matsuda matches can we enjoy? Because a lot of times with the old school guys, there's not a mountain of footage. What can we watch of his now that we could really appreciate him?
On YouTube, you would find easy search would be against Danny Hodge. In Florida. It's not like his first match, but it is a good match of his, and I think it's clipped. It's not the whole match. I think the whole match would have been 45 minutes, so it's clipped, I believe. But then you also have footage of him in Florida during the late 70s.
Maybe with Dusty Rhodes or Eddie Graham, maybe.
Yeah, with Eddie Graham and real interesting. If you search for him, you can find footage and later footage. He's in WCW a little bit involved as a manager, but his wrestling is out there. It's not. It's available.
Now, I studied the
Claire and Muda, his protege. I just wanted to ask quickly. He enjoyed food, and I think we reviewed when it came out. Is it Shiro Dreams of Sushi, that Japanese documentary that won all those awards? There's a new one on a Japanese donut maker. Was your dad a proficient chef? Did he love to cook?
Oh, he loved to cook. Yes. Yeah. He's on the road. I mean, that he would make food for himself. You know, he would eat dinner out after the matches, but then like lunch and breakfast, he would cook for himself. And then he learned different recipes from the wrestlers that he worked with, like with Tito Copa. He learned chimichurri, Argentinian. And so he would pick up different types of food, different places. And yeah, he loved to cook. And he was very good at it.
I should just add quickly, Danny Hodge, many times I interviewed him before we lost him, said that was his greatest opponent. And it was. They wrestled all over the world, all over the U.S., the Southeast. It was an amazing feud over that NWA junior heavyweight title, which was super well respected.
Yeah, he talks a lot about Danny Hodge in the when he talks about the Oklahoma territory. And that was really big for him in his career and making a name for himself.
Now,
by the way, on YouTube, there's available. You can see some of his the way he would train his students. There is footage of that. I forgot. Yeah.
I think it was Ron Simmons.
I think Ron Simmons and Lex Luger.
Yeah.
Real intense training. Yeah. There's like 2 videos out there. Yeah.
Oh, there's a good one about Johnny Weaver sleeper hold. I think.
Okay. You're right. Yeah.
He
Now,
something.
I myself practiced jiu-jitsu, Okinawan jiu-jitsu for 5 years, and I was studying to get a brown belt in it, and I got an injury. I had to stop. But I am really interested to find out about how his involvement with the martial arts sort of blended in with his wrestling and the martial arts philosophy, especially behind really traditional Japanese martial arts. How did that influence what he did as a wrestler?
When he left Rikidozan, he went training on his own. And he said he studied with a karate master, a sensei, from Okinawa. And he learned how to use karate. And then he would practice it with his fellow students on the streets in the Ginza to test their skills. So that's a foundation of his wrestling skills.
Did he study a lot of other martial arts? Because that's another thing, too, that's very typical, is that once you learn one art, you want to learn the other parts of it. Like, did he ever study judo or jiu-jitsu? And
karate and judo were his main arts.
And then obviously teaching was a big part of it. Did he ever teach you or your family any way of no great moves or anything like that? Well, a lot of times we do see people that are the children of professional wrestlers and they get involved in professional wrestling as well. Is that something you ever considered? Or if not, why not? Why did you not, other than writing this book?
It wasn't even on the radar. No.
What do you do? Maybe Javier can ask you, what do you do? Because we don't know your background.
Oh, for a living? I'm a massage therapist.
And are you in Florida?
What's that?
Are you in Tampa or
Florida? Yeah. I've been a therapist for about 20 years now.
But now you're an author, so you can use that as part of your title as well.
I will write.
So
this has been promoted big time in Japan. I don't know when it came out. This is the first time hearing of it, so I'm ashamed of that, and I apologize. You should be getting a zillion buys, like PayPal buys from Japan.
It's on. I wrote it through the Amazon self-publishing program. So it's available worldwide wherever Amazon is sold. And yes, in Japan, I did sell. And then also, I was surprised to get sales in England and Australia and Canada. So, and America. Those are the main countries that I've had sales with.
And you probably have a.
History.
Well, I'm in El Salvador, but I had to get it in Miami first. So, but technically, you got to sail in El Salvador.
Yeah. Good. Yay. Thanks, Javier.
And
one day when I'm up in Tampa, I'm gonna ask you to sign it though.
Yes, I will be happy to. Love to.
Sure.
We'll have to go out.
Was there anything that you learned from making this book that was a real surprise to you that you'd never learned about your father that you discovered?
Yeah, well, his history of growing up during the war and how hard, what a hard life that was. But then how much that made him appreciate America and his success. And then, the other thing is what really was quite shocking. When he left Japan to go to Peru, he told his parents, "If I do not succeed, you will never see me again."
Wow.
That's very, very Japanese, right? It's like
So it took him 4 years to make it the way he wanted to, and then he returned to Japan to see his family in 1964. So
I just find this fascinating thing. Now, where did he live in Japan during the war?
Yokohama area.
Yokohama. To me, I find it very interesting that he was not angry at America.
No, well, so you have to understand in the history of the American occupation, America was seen as saving Japan. They can't, and the soldiers had.
We dropped 2 nukes on him, so you can only go so far saving someone.
Enslaving people, the Japanese American, that was horrific. We need to make reparations for that.
Yeah.
Well, just from my father's point of view, as a child, and you see the Japanese soldiers, they have food, they have money, and they were very generous with sharing. And then also the soldiers have their own train car to ride on. So he looked up to that. He said, they have what I want. They're very prosperous. So that's why he always had the American dream, right? To come to the land of opportunity. And so he never had a bad view of America. The Japanese are very resilient people.
It's funny because then he comes to America that he loves so much, and he's a heel the entire time that he's here. So he comes to a country that he said that he loves, and we all hate him for the entirety of his career.
Well, he just wound up taking it out on Hulk Hogan. So we're all even now, right?
Right.
Yeah, we love the stories of him stretching Hulk Hogan, the two, he and Luger, the two guys that were more bodies as opposed to a Thez type. I hope people will get this book. We don't even want you to reveal like his history with Inoki and Baba. Those are the number 2 guys underneath Ricky in Japan once your dad left.
Right,
I'm sure there's quite the history, particularly with Inoki or Sakaguchi or Tenru or any of those guys that all praised and loved and respected your dad.
Another thing that really surprised me, and Javier wrote about it in his articles, and this is kind of why we're here talking about it, but that he did actually break Hulk Hogan's leg, and I did not know that.
Wow.
So, my mom.
Was that just an accident, or was it during a move, or?
Well, according to Javier and the
I wasn't there, but go ahead. According to Javier. According to Javier's research.
And Hulk Hogan has confirmed it now that he did break his leg just to break him into the business.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
But it's Hulk Hogan never he never denies that happened.
Right.
And he actually the way when he says it, he says, "Well, it was my I deserved it," and it was, and the other side is, well, Hogan had to protect himself, and he didn't, and that's what happened. It wasn't anything about I don't like you, so I'm going to do this to you, but it was you got to take the business seriously.
Yes.
And the story goes, Hogan went back afterwards, and then he was trained because he proved, look, I really do want to be in this. And tough way to start out, right?
Yeah, but look what he succeeded at.
Every time that story is posted, people say, no, it was the lower leg. No, it was the ankle. No, it was this. And I start taking out the anatomy pictures online. Listen, lower leg is comprised of this, and Hogan says it was that, so it is correct.
Correct.
And if Hogan's lying, well, I'm sorry. That's what Hogan said.
Right.
And Stephanie's father said it happened. So those are two people.
Yeah.
And I'm sure there are other people there too, you know.
Now, Mike Graham talked about it before he died, before we lost Mike Graham as well as his dad. That must have hit your father hard when Eddie had all that stuff going on and committed suicide, which was really horrific. And then to lose Mike Graham the same way, his son who had made it in the biz.
Very sad.
Your dad went through quite a lot in that territory, the highs and the lows. But
yep, it's true.
This must be must read. I cannot think. We just had a guy on with a book on Irish wrestling, but this book too, so important. Anybody that wants to know history and really the inner workings of one of the greatest trainers, hooker shooter, and this guy was up there with the Stu Harts, the Bert Assaridis, the Carl Gotches, etc., Larry Shark, Eddie Sharkey, folks like that. They're not around. We've lost all those guys. Bill Miller. There's no more hooker shooter types around unless you want to consider Brock Lesnar or Kurt Angle. That's it.
Did your father ever want to be like the WWF or the NWA World Champion? Did he ever express like the? Because I mean, your father won all sorts of mid-level titles, but he never won anything.
World Junior Heavyweight Champion. That was the second belt right under the Funks and Briscoes. That was a respected, huge global title. That later on, Satoru Sayama, Tiger Mask, held that belt that Hiro had held in the feud with Hodge.
But it's still not the world's heavyweight champion.
Well, it wasn't heavyweight. It was a junior heavyweight.
Well, we've seen junior heavyweights fight. I mean, there's lots of guys that wind up being the world heavyweight champion that don't.
That belt was super important in the 60s and 70s. I mean, Danny Hodge and Hiro defended it all over the world, so it was a super prestigious belt. Granted, it wasn't the heavyweights, but and I don't know. I forgot how at most Hiro was like around 220, 230 at most. It was a little bit heavier.
Maybe 250.
What I got from the book is what I got from the book is that he didn't really. It's not that he didn't care about titles. I think it was more important for him when he was in the ring to really sell that wrestling was real, was a legit form of sport, and he wanted other people to respect it as well, and that came afterwards with his training. That's what I got from the book. He wanted people to respect him, the business, and wrestling in general, and he wanted to represent respect whether he had a belt or not.
I think you're right on about that. I remember saying the show. It was all about putting on a good show for people, making a good match, and making the fans really involved rather than the outcome, win, lose, or draw. It doesn't really matter. What matters is the match.
Sometimes I wonder if us, I know everyone here, Dr. Lano, Evan, and Russ, I know you've all been in some part of the business, but we're all still fans, and I wonder if sometimes fans put more importance on the belts than the wrestlers themselves. But that's one of those topics that will never end, But it's an interesting thought there. Who knows?
The only place I've ever seen guys not like throw their title belts down, when they get to the hotel room, they just throw it on the floor, etc. is in Japan. My travels there. When you go into those locker rooms, New Japan or even at Sushi Onita's backstage at his shows. Those championships were revered, like, boxing titles, etc. They put them in cases and travel around with them like that. Not here in the U.S. and even in Mexico. Sometimes they kind of fling them. They're just a prop. But Japan, it's a whole different scene. And your dad had respect. That was probably his world title, was respect. Even though the marks, the fans might have disliked him, he was one of those guys where they had they disliked the guy, but they had this respect because they knew he was tough as S.
Yeah.
Whereas like a buffoon heel, it was different.
I'll say, because the book is titled The Hiro Matsuda Stories, Samurai Spirit, and his friends said he had a samurai spirit. So I was curious, what exactly does that mean? So I looked it up, and it means that it comes from the Bushido Code, and the main characters are benevolence, justice, respect, wisdom, fidelity, loyalty, and sincerity. And that's the moral code of the samurais: attitude, behavior, and lifestyle. I would say that sums up my dad pretty well.
Wow. That's actually a perfect note for us to end on, as we're right up against the hour here. Can you please let our fans know how they could get a hold of the book and how they could order the book?
So it's Hiro Matsuda Stories, Samurai Spirit, and it's on Amazon.com. Just go to Amazon and you can get it there. It's an ebook and in print, so whichever form you like.
That's fantastic. And is there a website where they can find out more about your father?
There's a Facebook page, the Hiro Matsuda Stories, and not a website. That's the Facebook page, and then Instagram, Hiro Matsuda Wrestler.
Do you think you're going to write any more wrestling books? Is this it for you? This is the be-all, end-all? Well, we've really enjoyed having you as a guest. Love to have you in the future if you do decide to do something else related with your father. And Javier, always a pleasure to have you on as a additional guest host for us. And for the rest of our fans, we wish you all a great evening, and we'll see you all next week. Good night, everybody.
Stay on. Go. Stephanie, don't leave. Hang on a sec.
Okay.
Good night, everyone.